leaders of the Joint Trade Union Movement, the National Trade Union Center, the Federation of Independent Trade Unions and NGOs, on the occasion of the 84th anniversary of the modern trade union movement in Trinidad and Tobago, members of the media, members of the protective services and frontline workers, sisters and brothers, well-wishers, our listening and viewing audiences on social and traditional media, both home and abroad, including the many thousands of our members and supporters who cannot be in Faizabad this Labor Day, but who are at home viewing or listening to this historic and unprecedented Labor Day address. Friends and comrades, good afternoon. It is without a doubt that this year we are indeed recognizing Labor Day, June 19th, in unprecedented times and in an unprecedented way. We are recognizing Labor Day at a time when humanity is being threatened with a pandemic that has almost brought the entire world to a standstill. But as we recognize Labor Day this year, we must immediately recognize workers globally who kept the world going, but in particular, we must recognize workers of this country who are still keeping Trinidad and Tobago going during this pandemic. Because were it not for them, our country would have come to a complete standstill. In this regard, this afternoon, we wish to proudly recognize all our members and other workers, namely our nurses, teachers, T&Tech workers and their emergency crews, TSTT and other telecommunication workers, technicians, plant operators and other workers at PowerGen, NP and other energy-based workers. We recognize the sanitation workers, maxi-taxi drivers, postal workers, security officers, fire officers, prison officers, media workers, the finance and manufacturing sector workers and farmers. We recognize the doctors, pharmacists, and all the medical professionals. We recognize the WASA workers, port workers, gas station attendants, bus and taxi drivers, cleaners, police officers, soldiers, and the fisher folk. We also recognize the supermarket and grocery workers, market vendors, delivery drivers, and many other workers, unionized and ununionized, all of whom valiantly and selflessly are continuing to play their part on a daily basis. As committed and patriotic citizens, it is you that risk your lives daily to keep this country going, while the rest of us are staying safely indoors. And therefore, it is not the Prime Minister, it is you the country owes an eternal debt of gratitude. So this afternoon, on the occasion of Labor Day, we publicly thank you. We have always maintained that workers are the ones who turn the wheels of the economy, and therefore, simply calling workers essential, conveniently, just for them to work during this COVID-19 restrictions could never be enough. For us in the labor movement, all workers at all times should be treated essentially and with respect. But this Labor Day, notwithstanding the restrictions for COVID-19, we in the labor movement felt strong enough to send a clear and powerful message that the country must never forget the significance of June 19th, the significance of this junction, the significance of workers, and the significance of struggle, especially in the current situation. We must always remember the struggles of the past and the people of those struggles who made tremendous sacrifices. Sacrifices which led to numerous benefits which all of us have enjoyed over the years. So whether you are unionized or ununionized, everyone benefited in some way or the other. Today, we must acknowledge that the tree under which we find shelter and shade from the burning midday sun, that tree was not planted by us, but rather it was planted by someone else of yesterday. Our duty today is not only to protect that tree, but to plant more trees under which the future generations will find shelter and shade tomorrow. Indeed, it is undisputed that from inception to present, the labor movement has made significant contributions to the development of Trinidad and Tobago. It is precisely because of those struggles and those achievements that today we in the labor movement have secured a priceless legacy. It is this legacy that has always given us the moral authority to critically analyze the state of our country and to fearlessly and independently commend or condemn as we see fit, regardless of the consequences. Imagine in this COVID-19 situation, employers, especially the government and their agencies, want us to accept without question the full exploitation of workers under the guise of quote-unquote a new normal. But actually, on the ground, the reality is that the so-called new normal is really a full acceleration of the old normal. The old normal of disrespect for workers and their collective agreements, disregard for terms and conditions of employment, and disregard for the rights, dignity, and status of all workers. Like in Nazi Germany in the 1930s, theirs is a desperate attempt to decimate the labor movement and completely remove trade unions from the landscape of Trinidad and Tobago. Clearly, that is their new normal. So therefore, to protect our rights as workers, we have absolutely no option but to provide a formidable, decisive, and united response. It is for this reason our theme for this year, Labor Day, is Unite to Fight. But this year, the labor movement also recognizes the 100-year anniversary of the birth of the great George Weeks. He was born on March 9, 1921. Comrade George Weeks served as the third President General of the Oilfields Workers Trade Union for 25 years. Comrade Weeks was arrested and jailed on 2 occasions. And for what? Simply for his unrelenting stance for a better Trinidad and Tobago. 51 years ago today, he was imprisoned on Nelson Island and therefore could not celebrate Labor Day with the workers. Make no mistake about it, Comrade Weeks changed Trinidad and Tobago. Among his many achievements, he led the campaign for the nationalization of the energy sector with the 1979 slogan, Texaco must go. Indeed, this was revolutionary. He understood the importance of the people owning and controlling the commanding heights of the economy. This is what led to the nationalization of a major part of our energy sector. This vision and belief of Comrade Weeks is even more relevant today when we consider the continued role of the multinationals in our energy sector and the role of the 1% owning large parts of our country's economy. But sadly, with one fell swoop by a visionless Prime Minister, a major part of Comrade Weeks's and the country's tangible achievement came to an abrupt end on November 30th, 2018. It came to an end with the shutting down of the largest oil company owned by the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And now this same visionless Prime Minister is well prepared to place this crown jewel completely back into the hands of the multinationals. Therefore, this Labor Day, on the occasion of the 100-year anniversary of his birth, in the spirit of Comrade Weeks, we must redouble our commitment to struggle towards the realization of Comrade Weeks's vision. A vision of we, the people, owning and controlling and benefiting from the commanding heights of our economy. But today there can be absolutely no doubt that our country is facing a major public health crisis, the likes of which we have never experienced. Last year, Labor Day, we publicly went on record commending the government for the measures they took to contain the spread of the coronavirus. It is unfortunate that this year we are forced to express a completely different position. Last year when I stood here on June 19th, we had 123 cases and 8 deaths. But this year, as we speak, we have over 29,600 cases and over 700 of our citizens have passed away. In May alone, we had 326 deaths. There were more deaths in May than for the entire previous year. Whilst the government seems not to be alarmed and are quite comfortable just to announce the number of deaths, what they are not telling you is that our death rate of 3.5% is higher than that of most countries. They seem to have absolutely no sympathy and empathy for the grieving families of those who were struck down by this deadly disease. In addition, they recently reported that there are 455 patients in the hospital. But wait, these are only the figures coming from the Ministry of Health's report. We are informed by our comrades in the Trinidad and Tobago Registered Nurses Association, we are informed by them that the ministry's figures do not take into account patients who are already diagnosed, critically ill, and are waiting to be assigned a bed. These are the people in the tents, in the waiting rooms, in the corridors, on chairs and benches. These numbers are not accounted for when they give their updates. They are definitely not reporting the true picture, because when these critically ill people are not being assigned a bed and properly attended to on time, their situation worsens. Whilst the public is made to believe that people in all of the intensive care units are well taken care of, the sad truth is that a number of the intensive care units are manned by general practitioners, and some people in these intensive care units are not being given the required specialized intensive care. The fact is that our healthcare system has been collapsing for quite a while, long before COVID-19, and now with the weight of the coronavirus, it has totally collapsed. The only thing that is keeping it going are our hard-working doctors, nurses, attendants, and healthcare professionals who are totally overworked, swamped, and overwhelmed. And therefore, today, we in the trade union movement vehemently condemn outright the statement made by the leader of the opposition to denigrate them, or any attempt to impute their involvement in some conspiracy to murder citizens. Downright foolishness. Such statements ascribed to our medical professionals are malicious, reckless, and downright politically stupid. We want to make it abundantly clear that we in the labor movement stand firmly behind and fully support all our committed and dedicated healthcare professionals. Last year, the government was boasting how well they were doing containing the spread of the coronavirus. Whilst they used the coronavirus as a main election platform issue and condemned the opposition for their position on it, but look at what is happening now. Clearly, the government's performance to date is nothing short of an abysmal failure in handling this pandemic. Because now that the grim reality is facing us, with thousands infected and over 700 persons dead, the government is refusing to take responsibility. But if you take credit for the success last year, then you must accept responsibility for the current failures. The government's failure to act quickly and prudently have resulted in our high numbers. The daily cases at the end of February into March this year were in single digits. But by the beginning of April, things started to change. In his typical boastful and arrogant style, the Prime Minister, while trying to justify the arrival of the inter-island ferry 5 years late, he told everyone to come to Tobago for Easter. Tobago is the place to be. Remember that statement? The opposition making a big issue about the ferry, come to Tobago. Remember that statement? The point is, whether 50,000 people traveled over one weekend or in 1 week, the fact is that 50,000 people traveled back and forth and indeed was in Tobago for the Easter. That was a major super spreader event. But now, he refuses to take responsibility for such an irresponsible statement and its direct contribution to the high numbers today. Instead of locking down at the beginning of April, he and his government waited to the end of April, after Easter, just because he wanted to make a point about the ferry. But by then, sadly, it was too late. The numbers speak for themselves. The government has also failed miserably in their vaccination program. We are nowhere even close to where we should be with vaccination for our citizens. And herd immunity remains just an elusive dream. Herd immunity is completely out of sight because there's absolutely no clear pathway towards achieving it. Whilst the Prime Minister boasted to the world that he is not begging for vaccines, now we are at the bottom of the barrel, scraping from here, there and everywhere for vaccines for our citizens who are being infected by the hundreds every day, with many people dying daily. This country should have been the first in line with the procurement of vaccines for all our citizens. That would have allowed us to maintain full control in containing the spread of the coronavirus. Every week, we the citizens are being told that we are in a good place. And in the height of arrogance, the citizens are being scolded and talked down to by using the most derogatory, facetious, and disrespectful language. While many people are suffering, facing extreme economic trauma and hardship, loss of jobs, loss of income, with many of our people having no means to put food on the table during this lockdown, whilst this occurs, we have a Prime Minister who takes the opportunity on a weekly basis just to blame the citizens. With the government's arrogance, coupled with its ineptness, and with a total lack of vision and leadership, they have totally mishandled the procurement of vaccines. And now, the situation is completely out of control. Whilst our Caribbean neighbors have been able to secure and began an effective rollout of vaccination for their citizens, as I had mentioned before, we are still at the bottom of the heap, scraping from here, there, and everywhere for vaccines. Imagine, we have only administered 168,477 doses, with only 24,018 of our citizens getting the double dose. At this critical time, we have not even fully vaccinated 10% of our population. But we have a Minister of Health who shamelessly, publicly genuflect and prostrate himself before the Prime Minister, saying that the country owes the PM a debt of gratitude. What foolishness! No, 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 Mr. Minister of Health. It is the Prime Minister who owes the country an explanation for the government's abject failure to properly respond to the pandemic, because there are no mass vaccination of our people. Clearly, the government has truly failed in the response to the pandemic. Today, we maintain that every death from the day that vaccines became available to the world, from that time to now, all of those new cases of infections and deaths are on the hands of this government. But what is the real problem with this vaccine? Whilst our poor people are in the sun and rain, especially our senior citizens who have to line up for hours to be vaccinated, with most of them being turned away without receiving any vaccine, whilst this is happening, now the country is realizing that certain surreptitious arrangements are being made to make special vaccine available for certain people. This special vaccine is not the vaccine that the citizens have been given so far. And what is worse, this secret vaccine was never mentioned by the Prime Minister in any of his weekly updates. But who are those vaccines for? Is it for the ministers and their friends, the 1%? This may not be the only time secret vaccine came into the country. We ask the question, how much more secret vaccines are entering the country? This is a major cover. There are definitely many unanswered questions. This government needs to come clean. They are constantly trying to fool the people. What we really have now is a vaccine fiasco in this country. They just cannot be trusted. But remember, they can fool some of the people, some of the time, but they cannot fool all of the people, all of the time. Now turning our attention to the economy. Whilst the government would like to blame the pandemic for our country's bad economic performance, it is important to note that long before COVID-19 had arrived, our economy was already in deep crisis. COVID-19 only exacerbated the economic crisis. As we look at the current state of our country's economy, it is a fact that many thousands of our citizens are struggling daily just to make ends meet, with some actually not knowing where the next meal will be coming from. Such is the level of desperation that exists on the ground. Instead of diversification, there was no significant growth in any sector, and even worse, with major contraction and reduction in the heart of our economy itself, the energy sector. Instead of job creation, we have the complete opposite, where many thousands of our workers were sent home. Instead of social justice, there exist rapidly increasing levels of inequality and inequity throughout the society. This has resulted in the total decimation of our country's middle class, creating a massive disproportionate gap between the haves and the have-not. The reality is that all the gains of the past are being reversed by this PNM government. Their neoliberal policies are having a devastating effect on the country, and it has been driving our people into abject poverty. This is definitely not what Dr. Eric Williams had in mind for our people. But the facts are the facts. Tens of thousands of workers have lost their jobs. Workers at Petrotrin, contractor companies throughout the oil industry, BP, UTT, TSTT, TIDCO, ArcelorMittal, Centrin, Unilever, TCL, Trinidad Aggregate Products, Yara, and other methanol and ammonia plants workers at Point Lisas Industrial Estate, bar and casino workers, restaurant workers, workers in stores and malls. Hundreds of thousands of people have been directly affected when you consider the families of those who lost their jobs. That is this PNM neoliberal economy. That is their success story. Taken from the 2020-2021 annual economic survey, the preliminary central bank estimate suggests a significant contraction in domestic economic activity in 2020. Food inflation accelerated through the year, averaging 2.8% when compared to 2019, which averaged 0.6%. According to the Central Bank Economic Bulletin for January 2021, the estimate showed that the Central Bank quarterly index of real economic activity contracted by 8.7% year on year during the third quarter of 2020, based on a relatively large drop in energy output. By the end of the year, the domestic economic activity contracted overall by 7.9% in 2020. This was led by the decline of 13.8% in energy sector output, the report said. We have been saying year after year that this government has not introduced any new revenue streams. So it should be no surprise that revenue fell by over $10 billion from $46.7 billion in 2019 to $34 billion in 2020. But don't shoot the messenger. These are the facts. Check it for yourself. But instead of telling the country how the government intends to raise revenue, other than taxing blood out of stone from the people, they want workers and the people, including pensioners, to bear the full brunt of economic adjustment. This is on top of the fact that so many of our workers have already been sent home or had their income cut drastically. But what does all of this statistic mean? Well, it simply means that with the current approach and direction of this government, there will be no social programs, no gate, and even more cutbacks on allocations for our universities, namely UTT and UE. So for our youth, young people, and for workers, there will be no opportunities if they continue in that direction. Whilst the central bank bulletin stated that the short-term outlook for Trinidad and Tobago will be dictated by the evolution of the coronavirus, we would like to say differently that the short-term outlook for Trinidad and Tobago is dictated by government's response or lack thereof. But whatever happened to the report from the Committee on the Roadmap for Recovery, which was unveiled with much fanfare in July of last year? Now, quoting from the same Roadmap to Recovery Committee's report, what happened to Objective 1, social protection, leave no one behind? Well, the sad truth is that thousands of our people have already been left behind. Still with the report, and what about Objective 2, retain and create jobs? You just have to ask the thousands of workers who have lost their jobs since this report. And whatever happened to the part of the report that addresses, and I quote, sustaining lives and livelihood, reigniting the economy, end quote? Well, you only have to ask the thousands of CPEP workers who recently got a 35% pay cut to their already meager pay. But how do you cut from $1,000 a fortnight or cut from $500 a week? How can a government take away from $500 a week from people who have to support a family whilst their ministers' salaries remain untouched? How could the government be so heartless? They are taking away from those who could hardly make ends meet. This is another heartless action from a government who simply just don't care about the people. This is the punishment you get for making what they say was the right choice. Last year, we warned about the government's intention to reduce NIS benefits. 1 year later, our information is that the decision has been taken to begin implementing these reductions. One of their recommendations is to deny you your NIS pension until the age 65. After paying NIS religiously throughout your entire working life, and you now retire at age 60, and you are counting on that NIS pension, you now have to wait until age 65. So you will be on retirement without your NIS pension for a whole 5 years. After they have mismanaged the fund by not ensuring that employers are compliant in remitting both their payment and their employees' NIB's contribution to the fund, with thousands of workers not being able to contribute to the fund because they are home, and with bad investment of the fund, all of this is contributing to the mismanagement of the fund. But you, the worker, have not contributed to the mismanagement. You have diligently made your full contribution during your entire working life, and now they want to deny you your NIS pension. What is even worse is that they are saying that you are living too long and that you are a burden on the state. Whilst this government is planning to deny poor people their NIS pension, ministers and parliamentarians, all of them, their pensions are guaranteed and even indexed to cope with inflation. How more unfair can these people get? These are the same people who are cutting the CPEP workers' meager salary. And what about workers from the prestige outlets like KFC, Pizza Hut, TGI Friday, Subway, and Starbucks? The little stipend they were receiving during the lockdown was stopped. What about them? And what about the other thousands of workers who have been home without any assistance whatsoever? What about the many thousands of workers who are not attached to any company, but who depend on a day work just to take care of the family? These people have not received any salary relief grant from the government. And what about the people who were sent home before COVID-19 and with the lockdowns over a year now have no opportunity to find work? What about them? The roadmap for recovery committee's recommendations clearly went the way of the Economic Advisory Committee and the Lashley Committee on Petrotrade, which is absolutely nowhere. The government refuses to take any advice from these committees, which they appointed. They arrogantly do whatever they want, even to the detriment of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. While they would say otherwise, evidently for this PNM government, the pain and suffering of so many thousands of our people just don't matter. They are simply disconnected from the reality on the ground. They are disconnected from the pain and suffering and hurt of ordinary people. And making matters worse for poor people are the fact that the banks continues to amass huge profits whilst many of our citizens go hungry. On November 9, 2020, last year, the Republic Bank website announced it recorded 904.1 million in end-of-year profits. And on May 3, 2020, this year, on the bank's website, they announced that they recorded 687.3 million in half-year profits. The First Citizen Group had recorded a profit before tax of $232.9 million for 3 months ending December 31st, 2020. Also, according to their unaudited accounts published on TNT Stock Exchange, the group's chairman stated that the First Citizen Group concluded another profitable quarter for the period ending 31st March this year, 2021, recording a before-tax profit of $207.3 million. So whilst people are struggling to maintain their families and pay their monthly installments, pay their loans and mortgages, these banks are still declaring enormous profits in hundreds of millions of dollars. But where did they get all this profit from? Today, we call on all the banks and all the lending institutions and all those stores with hire purchase arrangements who amass all the wealth from the workers and the people of this country. We call on them to give the people a real moratorium on all these outstanding installments with absolutely no interest, allowing them breathing space to put food on the table over the period of the pandemic. Now let us examine the performance of the energy sector. The Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, in its latest economic bulletin report for January 2021 this year, identified that natural gas production declined by 23.6% over the second half of 2020. Still with the report, natural gas production dropped 29.8% year-on-year during October to November 2020, alongside a 46.9% fall in LNG production. The downstream industry also saw declines in output, with methanol production declining by 29.4% during the period, while production of ammonia was down by 1.1%. Today, we want to restate that a major contributor to the decline in downstream production is the renegotiated pricing agreement between BP and the government of Trinidad and Tobago. I wish to also remind all that it was the Prime Minister and Minister Young who led that negotiation. Those negotiations resulted in BP increasing the cost to NGC for purchasing our natural gas. NGC simply passed on that cost to the gas users, which resulted in their extremely high operating costs and the eventual closure of those downstream plants on the Point Lisas industrial estate. This has resulted in the loss of jobs and foreign exchange to our country. This is why the OWTU, in the spirit of George Weeks, wrote to the CEO of BP last year, calling on him to renegotiate the badly negotiated pricing arrangement that is disadvantageous to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. This letter was hand-delivered by hundreds of energy sector workers in the height of the carnival seasons last year. A copy of this letter was also hand-delivered to the British High Commissioner on the same day. Today, the labor movement insists that the natural resource of this country belongs to the people of this country, and therefore the people of this country must benefit from those resources. And what about crude oil production? Based on the Ministry of Energy Consolidated Monthly Bulletin, crude oil production has fallen under heritage. The numbers don't lie. In 2016, oil production under Petrotrin in Trinma, it was 20,505 barrels per day. And in ENP land, it was 12,000 barrels per day. By 2020, under heritage, offshore production fell to 17,848 barrels per day, and heritage land production also fell to 10,683 barrels per day. So this PNM government took oil production from 32,583 barrels in 2016 under Petrotrin to 28,531 barrels under heritage in 2020. Under this PNM and their heritage model, the country had a decrease of 12.4% in daily crude oil production. Whilst heritage management are talking about some projection in the future, they refuse to tell you the facts that their oil production actually fell since they shut down Petrotrin. Under the OWTU's alternative plan to closing Petrotrin, listen now, the country would have enjoyed an increase in crude oil production by moving the same ENP land from 12,000 barrels per day to 15,000 barrels per day, and Trinma's production from 20,000 to 25,000 barrels per day for the same period without any major capital injection. By putting these low-cost measures in place, the production had already begun to increase at the time of shutdown. Let me say that again. By putting these low-cost measures in place, crude oil production in Petrotrin had already begun to increase at the time of the shutdown. So whilst they try to spin it to justify their shutting down of Petrotrin, clearly the figures speak for themselves. So in case you are opening and closing your fridge and you didn't hear, the fact is that after shutting down Petrotrin, crude oil production has actually dropped. Whilst they will tell you, the people, otherwise, the figures don't lie. But further, the situation is even worse when one considers the country's total crude oil production. Still quoting from the Ministry of Energy's monthly consolidated bulletin, the country's total crude oil and condensate production fell from 71,818 barrels in 2017 to just 56,472 barrels in 2020, representing a 21.3% decline under this PNM government. But don't expect them to tell you that. This information is hidden from the public. It is hidden from you, the people. We have always said that one of the greatest crimes committed against the people by this government has to be the closure of the Petroleum Company of Trinidad and Tobago. We maintain our position that it was wrong to close Petrotrin. For example, this government continues to talk about loss in government revenue with absolutely no new revenue streams. But we have always been making the point about Petrotrin's contribution to the country's economy and what the country stands to lose if they shut it down. Today, we are vindicated because we are not now projecting anything, but we can now look at the actual loss to the country since the company was shut down. Whether you as a citizen was fooled by this government's big Petrotrin lie or not, you are definitely impacted. Remember the campaign about Petrotrin's debt and its impact on the country's sovereign debt? And if they could not pay $850 million by August 2019, what that would cause? Remember how they demonized the Petrotrin workers? Remember how they said that if they did not shut down Petrotrin, there would be no beds for the hospitals, no money for the schools, and no money for roads and other infrastructure, all of which the country is still waiting on. Remember that vicious campaign of disinformation, misinformation, and the big Petrotrin lie? Remember that? Today, 30 months later, you will be amazed to know the real losses and counting for the closure of Petrotrin. Now here are the facts. The local motoring public consumes approximately 28,000 barrels of fuel per day, which costs approximately $1.9 million or $56.7 million per month. Since the closure of Petrotrin from November 31st, 2018 to present, Paria, their new kid on the block, would have spent approximately $1.7 billion to purchase fuel for our local consumption, which Petrotrin was producing locally. In 1 year, Paria is proud to declare just $120 million TT in profits, whilst spending approximately $680 million of our very scarce US dollars to purchase fuel. US currency, which the country is in desperate need of, but which US currency the country will never get back. Now, juxtapose that with the Petrotrin situation. Remember, before they shut down Petrotrin, the refinery was producing fuel for our local consumption. It is important to note that Petrotrin also produced more than enough of its local crude to produce fuel for our local consumption. In other words, we did not have to spend foreign exchange for local fuel consumption. And in addition to that, Petrotrin was a net earner of foreign exchange. Additionally, they borrowed $400 million to send home the workers. In addition to the 3,500 permanent workers, there were also temporary, casual workers, and service contractors, employees attached to Petrotrin's operation, totaling approximately 7,000 workers. So, these workers paid PAYE, NIS, and health surcharge. Since the shutdown of Petrotrin, the country has lost $625 million TT in PAYE, $347.5 million TT in NIS, and $10 million TT in health surcharge. Also, Petrotrin was spending approximately $150 million TT annually to procure the services of NGC for gas, Tiantec for electricity, and WASA for water for its operation. Since the closure to now, the loss of revenue for these three entities combined amounted to $375 million TT in total. When you add all these losses, the country has lost $1,303 million TT since the closure of Petrotrin. And every month that passes, the country will continue to lose 43.4 million TT dollars. So, since the closure of Petrotrin, the country has spent approximately 2.1 billion US dollars or 14.3 billion TT equivalent in purchasing fuel and paying off the workers. The country has also lost 1.3 billion TT dollars in revenue. Both the cost to purchase fuel and the loss of revenue are continuing daily. In the face of all of these losses, amounting to over 15.6 billion TT dollars, this government wants to boast about Paria making profits for the same period, which is approximately only $250 million TT. That is economic P&M style. That is the big P&M lie. And wait, all of this does not take into account the losses that comes from the spin-off effect of economic activity that was generated by the Petrotrin operation. What this myopic P&M government did not understand, and perhaps never will, is that Petrotrin was not just another oil company. Apart from Petrotrin being a net foreign exchange earner, a guarantor for fuel security for our country, and a major symbol of our country's energy independence, apart from all of that, it was a major part of the public energy infrastructure around which the rest of the economy revolved. So who advised them to shut down Petrotrin? That question was never answered. Remember, they claimed that they were advised to close Petrotrin by some experts, but up to this day, they cannot say who those experts were or where did that advice come from. Well, I tell you today, this is what it costs and continues to cost the country just to try to destroy the OWTU. But I assure you today, the Petrotrin story, this Petrotrin story, is very far from over. Turning our attention to agriculture now. While the country should be enjoying an increase in local food production in a time of this pandemic, we see that the imported food on the shelves of the high-end supermarkets are full. It is clear that there is no real attempt to deal with the food import bill. It is a fact that we have a massive food import bill averaging over 6 billion TT dollars, and with COVID-19, it is even more. The refusal to deal with this issue seems to be a well-orchestrated plan by this government, which only ensures that the 1% and the major food importers, friends of this government, benefit substantially even during this crisis of a pandemic. Instead of providing support for increased local food production, our farmers are being removed from arable lands, which are now used for industrial development and housing. There is also the unfair distribution of land for agricultural purposes. While large amounts of lands are given to friends of this government, farmers who have applied and are in possession of the necessary documents are unable to acquire land. In addition, farmers have to pay more for agricultural inputs like seeds, veterinary drugs, fertilizers, and agricultural equipments. The situation is further exacerbated by our country's chronic foreign exchange shortage. Suppliers of these items are purchasing foreign exchange at black market rates and are simply passing on the cost to the farmers. The government's lack of concern for agriculture can also be seen in the reduction in the number of officers in the Prida Larceny unit. This unit is significantly under-resourced and cannot cope with the numerous cases of Prida Larceny, which will only further frustrate our farmers' efforts in growing local food for our table. More than that is the significant importation of the 3- and 4-year-old frozen meats like chicken, beef, goat, turkey, duck, and pork. Whilst this only benefits big business and big supermarket owners, it further exacerbates the foreign exchange crisis and also threatens the health, where in some cases these imported foods are unfit for human consumption. Instead of investing more in small and medium farmers to produce more meat for local food demand and reduce the dependency on scarce foreign exchange for imports, especially in this time of COVID-19, instead of doing that, this government support is only for their friends, the 1%, and the big business supermarkets. You see, a food crisis, Trinidad and Tobago, will not affect the elites or the 1%. It will only affect the poor and working people of this country. Like the previous UNC government, this PNM government has also failed to produce any clear policy direction and support for local farming and agriculture, especially with COVID-19. And therefore, they must be held accountable for the problems within the sector, which adversely impact food prices and the health of our citizens. And now, let us focus on the continued vexing issue of crime. Although it is not taking center stage and prominence in the media and news reports at this time, in case you didn't notice, the issue of crime has not gone away. Indeed, the issue of people being murdered and being gunned down on a daily basis is still with us. In spite of the coronavirus, a state of emergency and a curfew, citizens are still experiencing home invasions, carjackings at gunpoint, and robberies. Armed robberies in the streets and business places are still occurring. Even prison officers are being mercilessly gunned down, with shots being called from within the jail. Although these criminals wear masks like everyone else, they have no fear or care for anybody, including the police. The guns and drug trade continues unabated, completely unaffected by COVID-19 restrictions. While we, the law-abiding citizens, conform to all the measures with respect to COVID-19 restrictions and the emergency power regulations, we are like sitting ducks in our homes. It is not a matter of if you will be robbed. It is a matter of when it will happen. Whilst you can wear a mask and social distance to protect yourself against the coronavirus, there is no protection against these criminals who roam the streets and invade your homes with impunity. The government has not stemmed the flow of sophisticated guns and ammunition coming into our country, which immediately gets into the hands of the criminals as their preferred tools of trade. Whilst the PNM in opposition consistently criticized the UNC for the porous borders, under this PNM government now, the borders are still wide open. It is a fact that whilst our official ports of entry are closed, our entire country's coastline still remains wide open, where illegal immigrants, drugs and guns enter our country regularly, sometimes in broad daylight. It is the responsibility, may I remind you, it is the responsibility of every government to guarantee the safety and security of all their citizens. People actually don't feel safe in the streets or even in the sanctity of their homes anymore. The government's failure to deal with this crime situation has resulted in a state of heightened anxiety amongst our law-abiding citizens. Just ask anybody who was a victim of a crime, a home invasion or a robbery. Regardless of which party you support, the bandit is no respecter of that. When the bandit kick down your door, they don't ask you what party you belong to. Therefore, we must not allow the government to abdicate this crucial responsibility to ensure that citizens feel safe in their homes. And last, but certainly not least, the issue of labor. Before going into the issues affecting labor, we want to address the joint trade union movement's clear position on the critical issue of vaccination. Our position is that whilst we advise our members to access the vaccine, we are vehemently opposed to mandatory vaccination in all forms for any reason. We are definitely against making vaccination a condition for work. Taking vaccine is voluntary, and we will fully support anyone who exercise their right to take or not take the vaccine. On the issue of labor now, it would be remiss of me not to report on the poor state of industrial relations in our country. For the country to achieve any form of economic progress, there must be industrial peace and stability, where workers' issues are given their deserving respect and priority. Nevertheless, there seems to be a concerted effort on the part of employers, especially this government, to use the COVID-19 pandemic to take advantage of workers, displaying the highest level of disregard for the serious issues that are affecting workers. Whilst these many issues and problems are being created by employers, the mechanisms for redress at the Ministry of Labour is dysfunctional at best, and in some cases, non-existent. For instance, the conciliation unit at the Ministry of Labour is under-resourced and understaffed. This seems to be of little concern to the Minister of Labour, whose regular delay in issuing unresolved certificate has now become the norm under his watch. Most unions can point to instances in one case or another where this minister is tardy in this regard. Therefore, workers are denied a timely pathway towards justice because their matters are not being referred to the court on time. This is the same Labour Minister who claimed that unions are being disingenuous for leaving the National Tripartite Advisory Council, NTAC. Without any consideration for the serious problems we were having in NTAC from its inception, and with no discussion with trade unions, he made this reckless statement. Today we take umbrage to that statement. It was downright disrespectful to the labor movement. Well, Minister, while your predecessor earned the title of Minister of Silence, with no real achievements so far and no real work being done in your ministry, you have achieved the title of Minister of No Labor. If you were genuinely doing your work, then we would not be complaining about the failures of the Ministry of Labour. My advice to you is to learn your work and do it before jumping out unjustifiably criticizing us. But today, there are a number of issues affecting various trade unions that continues to cry out for urgent attention. For example, the TTRNA, Trinidad and Tobago Registered Nurses Association, has consistently complained about the regional health authorities and the Ministry of Health. The RHAs and by extension the Ministry of Health are currently hiring nurses and midwifery personnel as temporary employees. This trend predates the COVID-19 pandemic and has been a major contributor to nursing attrition. Due to poor hiring and poor management practices at some of the RHAs, the staffing is severely short. This short staffing has been further depleted due to the COVID-19 pandemic, with the introduction of the parallel healthcare system and with the increasing cross-infection rates within the healthcare settings. The limited amount of staff available to care for patients is having a direct impact on the quality of care. For example, one registered nurse to 30 patients is totally unacceptable, and there are actually instances where such ratios exist. Some nursing students are experiencing challenges to graduate as they have been prohibited from continuing their clinical practices or have been informed that exams were suspended. The cancellation of stipend has also been a critical concern for the Trinidad and Tobago Registered Nurses Association, as many nursing students depend on the stipend to purchase books, meals, and personal items for the duration of the program. And further, there are no strict adherence by the RHAs to the protocol that maintains proper infection and control practices, such as adequate and appropriate PPEs, consistent adherence to quarantine and isolation protocols when there are high-risk exposures. Nurses in many RHAs are not compensated with overtime for longer working hours, nor are they provided with special daycare arrangements for their children who are currently home due to the COVID-19 restrictions. JTUM also has serious concerns that the Registration, Recognition and Certification Board has been experiencing challenges to meet, and this has been a major obstacle to the TTRNA's application to be the recognized majority union for its membership. Although nurses are making significant contribution to the healthcare system in this COVID-19 pandemic, their union is still not being given recognition status. Today, JTUM calls for the recognition of the TTRNA as the recognized majority union at all of the RHAs. For tutor, the issue of contract work persists in the education sector and is negatively impacting the attainment of national education goals. It is time that the Education Act be amended to have educators at the early childhood level be recognized as teachers and be brought formally into the education system. At a time when our students and their families are grappling with various challenges caused by the pandemic, the contracts for the majority of our school social workers who are in the student support services of the Ministry of Education will not be renewed when they end in July. The fact is that there are no kind of support mechanism provided by the state for our children. Teaching and non-teaching staff are now being asked to come out to schools which have not been assessed for safety after prolonged closure. This is completely unsafe. In addition, the Ministry of Education is still not filling vacancies. This is creating a high level of staff shortages. In spite of all of these issues affecting teachers, our country's educators are still working on 2014 salaries. Today, JTUM calls for the complete resolution of all these issues which are adversely impacting the education system. For the Banking, Insurance and General Workers Union, there are outstanding negotiations at the Republic Bank. Having declared more profit in the COVID-19 period than in the pre-COVID-19 time, the bank had the audacity to propose 0-0-0 for the next negotiating period. Also, can you imagine that workers in Kadi are still working on 2004 salaries and workers in the Cipriani College of Labor are still working on 2007 salaries? Just imagine that. This is unfair to the workers, and today JTUM calls for the settlement of those long outstanding negotiations. At the Aviation, Communication and Allied Workers Union, despite the pandemic, Caribbean Airlines has opted to maintain the lease of MAX 8 airplanes, while 1,500 workers have been laid off for almost 9 months without pay, and others are asked to take salary cuts. Whilst the union's suggestion for rotation in Trinidad was rejected, Caribbean Airlines Jamaica staff are currently on rotation. In terms of issues facing sanitation workers, JTUM condemns the disrespect by the Minister of Public Utilities for his refusal to acknowledge correspondence and a proposal from the Industrial and General Sanitation Workers Union. This proposal is aimed at creating greater efficiencies in Swimco's operation. Imagine that, and the minister rejects it. Today, we at JTUM also condemn the disrespectful treatment to all the sanitation workers, especially because they risk their lives and health working in one of the most hazardous environments in the country, especially in this pandemic. At TT Post, JTAM support the postal workers in their call for the permanent appointment of the temporary delivery officers into vacant positions. These workers have been working in vacant positions since 2014. These vacant positions are in accordance with cabinet-approved organization structure for TT Post. Additionally, these categories of workers have been working since the start of COVID-19 as essential workers and performing the same duty as permanent workers. JTAM demands that these workers be made permanent. It is only fair. At the Trinidad and Tobago Electricity Commission, it is clear to us now that the intention of TNTEC is to close the workers' pension plan and reduce pension benefits to the workers. TNTEC have secretly conducted a manpower audit which is shrouded in secrecy, and they refuse to share the details with the union. Like the WASA workers, who are under the same Minister of Public Utilities, TNTEC's intention is simply to use this manpower audit to reduce the workforce and send workers home. Like TNTEC and WASA workers, port workers are also targeted by this government, and therefore today we are calling on all port, WASA and TNTEC workers to join the National Unite to Fight campaign to save their jobs. Finally, on the issue of labor, we must address our departure from the National Tripartite Advisory Council, NTAC. The labor movement has always been a strong advocate for the process of social dialogue, as we believe that it is critically important for economic growth and development, labor productivity, and social order. It has been 5 years since the formation of NTAC, and in that entire time, the country has not seen the development of a single policy which has made any significant impact on the economic progress of the country, nor the establishment of a stable industrial relations environment. This PNM government continues to unilaterally take decisions which affects workers, from the shutdown of the Tourism Development Company in 2017 to Petrotrin in 2018. This was done under the guise of restructuring and resulting in massive job losses, social and economic fallout, and once again with the desired outcome of eradicating both trade unions and the collective agreements. Then there were also massive retrenchment at TSTT, UTT, and other state enterprises, with further threats to Lake Asphalt, effectively weakening representation of workers at those state enterprises. None of these were discussed at NTAC. The government is of the belief that they now have a template for getting rid of trade unions and collective agreements at state enterprises. It is the same approach and narrative that they use for the TDC and Petrotrin they are now using for TNTEC and WASA and the port. Watch out for that. Even whilst the trade unions were participating in NTAC, the government consistently pursued its anti-worker agenda without consultation. For example, the disrespectful Minister of Public Utilities publicly announced their intention to restructure TNTEC, TSTT, TT Post, and Swimcol, again without any consultation with the unions. Apart from being disrespectful, his ultimate intention is to reduce the workforce, plunging more people onto the breadline. Another example of disrespect for trade unions is the public pronouncement by the Minister of Finance concerning terms and conditions completely violating the collective bargaining process. The Minister of Finance has openly refused to honor existing agreements for NIB, port, and sanitation workers. Furthermore, Can you imagine, after 5.5 years in government, not one piece of labor legislation was brought to the parliament? There's an urgent need for immediate changes to labor legislation which gives workers priority in any liquidation process. Therefore, appropriate amendments to the Retrenchment and Severance Benefit Act and the Companies Act are urgently needed. Urgent changes are also needed to be made to the registration, recognition and certification process. This would allow for workers to exercise their rights to join a trade union of their choice. Far too many workers are denied trade union representation because of the current long and difficult recognition process. There is also need for urgent amendment to the Industrial Relations Act to allow the industrial court powers of enforceability of its judgment, and also to guarantee tenure of service for judges. Although the labor movement have been preaching these and many other issues on behalf of workers for the last 5 years, we have received no support at the level of NTAC. Whilst the population continue to suffer under this government's failing economic policies, with thousands of workers have been retrenched, with more to go, and with the demonizing of workers, disrespect for workers and their trade unions, increased prices and increased cost of living, attack on old age pension, significant increase in penalties for minor offenses, increase to the cost of fuel, plans to increase LPG, and plans to increase electricity and water rates. All of these measures are placing a heavy burden on the majority of our citizens who are buckling under pressure and who are faced with extreme hardship daily. Regardless of how government ministers try to spin it, or criticizing us for leaving, and even shamelessly claiming that the process was working, with all these issues and injustices against our people, the trade union movement could not simply continue to sit in a process where it was ordinary working people and the poor carrying this massive burden of economic adjustment. We could not take it anymore, and therefore without apology, we had to depart NTAC. So this afternoon, on this Labor Day, notwithstanding all of the restrictions to reduce the spread of COVID-19, we as a responsible trade union movement, we have done our duty by publicly reviewing the performance of this government. But clearly, this PNM government has shown a complete lack of vision and understanding of what it takes to build a strong nation. Finally, I would like to close with a very important quote, and I quote, "All of us deserve to enjoy America's promise in full. Our nation's leaders have a responsibility to deliver it. That starts with rebuilding unions. The middle class built this country, and unions built the middle class. Unions give workers a stronger voice to increase wages, improve quality of jobs, and protect job security, protect against racial and all other forms of discrimination and sexual harassment, and protect workers' health, safety, and benefits in the workplace. Unions uplift workers, both union and non-unions. They are critical to strengthening our economic competitiveness. But after generations of sweat and sacrifice, fighting hard to earn wages and benefits that built and sustained America's middle class, unions are under siege. Nearly 60 million Americans would join a union if they get a chance, but too many employers and states prevent them from doing so through anti-union attacks. They know that without unions, they can run the table on workers, union and non-union alike." End quote. In case you missed it, this is a quote from President Joe Biden, the President of the United States of America. He made this statement on March 9th this year in an address to Congress. Just imagine this. This is the bastion of capitalism. The bastion of capitalism in the world, recognizing the importance of trade unions. However, this myopic PNM government and their ministers are the complete opposite. And they are taking the country on a downward spiral with their campaign to eradicate trade unions. How backward can these people get? If there was any doubt, just look at the overkill with the curfew restrictions over this Labor Day weekend. The entire country is being locked down only because this PNM government wants to stifle the trade union movement over this Labor Day weekend. They are hell-bent on crushing and silencing any form of dissent or any voice that dare to criticize them or speak out against their poor governance. But today, I wish to state without reservation that the trade union movement shall not relent. Regardless of what they do or how much they try to oppress us, this state of emergency and curfew must come to an end. And rest assured, when that time comes, the trade union movement will be back on the streets in an even greater force. This afternoon, in the spirit of George Weeks, Uriah Butler, Adrian Cola Rienzi, and in the spirit of our ancestors, we redouble our commitment to resist all attempts to destroy the trade unions. In this regard, as workers, we must unite regardless of race, religion, or geographical location. All workers must be part of this massive Unite to Fight campaign in the interest of themselves and for the benefit of future generations. So as we lift up our eyes unto the hills, from whence cometh our help, with our faith in Almighty God and with true conviction in our cause, as a country, let us all go forward ever and backward never, forward ever and backward never, because we shall never, ever, ever surrender. I thank you.